Hi, Moskowitz here. Welcome to chapter 4 of Call the Wild. Who has won mastership? And one of the things to know about this chapter is that when we open, Buck has just killed Spitz, and now he's top alpha dog. He's going to be leading this whole team through the rest of this journey. Hey, what I say, I speak true when I say that Buck two devils. This was Francois's speech next morning when he discovered Spitz missing and Buck covered with wounds. He drew him to the fire and by its light pointed them out. Dat Spitz fight like hell, said Perrault as he surveyed the gaping rips and cuts. And dat Buck fight like two hells, was Francois's answer. And now we make good time. No more Spitz, no more trouble, sure. And while Perrault packed the camp outfit and loaded the sled, the dog driver proceeded to harness the dogs. Buck trotted up to the place Spitz would have occupied as leader, but Francois, not noticing him, brought Solex to the coveted position. In his judgment, Solex was the best lead dog left. Buck sprang upon Solex in a fury, driving him back and standing in his place. So, Truck has now Buck has now adopted a really primal attitude, and because he killed Spitz, he feels like I'm top dog. Like definitely I should be there, not Solex. But the humans have different judgment. They're like, well, Solex is next in line. Um, Buck is not going to let this go, so he attacks Solex and goes and stands in the lead position. Hey! Francois cried, slapping his thighs gleefully. Look at that Buck. Him kill that Spitz. Him think he's gonna take the job. Go away, Chook, he cried. But Buck refused to budge. He took Buck by the scruff of the neck, and though the dog growled threateningly, dragged him to one side and replaced Solex. The old dog did not like it and showed painfully that he was afraid of Buck. Francois was obdurate or stubborn, but when he turned his back, Buck again displaced Solex, who was not at all unwilling to go. Francois was angry. Now, by gar, I fix you, he cried, coming back with a heavy club in his hand. So now you have like this standoff where Solex in no way wants to deal with Buck. At this point, he's an older dog. He's not used to being lead sled dog. He's been attacked. He's more than happy to go back to his normal line in the pack. The humans are like, no, we're in charge and we're going to tell you what to do. And they get out the club. Now let's see how Buck reacts. Buck remembered the man in the red sweater and retreated slowly. Now remember, that man in the red sweater beat Buck to a pulp, and that's where he was beat into submission. So Buck remembered the man in the red sweater and retreated or backed up slowly. Nor did he attempt to charge in when Solex was once more brought forward, but he circled just beyond the range of the club, snarling with bitterness and rage, and while he circled, he watched the club so as to dodge if it was thrown by Francois, for he was become wise in the way of clubs. The driver went about his work, and he called to Buck when he was ready to put him in his old place in front of Dave. Buck retreated 2 or 3 steps. Francois followed him up, whereupon he again retreated. After some time of this, Francois threw down the club, thinking that Buck feared a thrashing. But Buck was in open revolt. Buck is rebelling. I don't know if any of you have ever had a dog. I've definitely had this experience. You go somewhere in the wilderness, you have the dog off a leash. You want to get the dog back on the leash to go back in the car, and he just keeps, darting away. Every time you get a little closer, the dog gets a little further back until you can't really catch him. Buck refuses to be put anywhere but the lead. He wanted not to escape a clubbing, but to have leadership. It was his by right, he had earned it, and he would not be content with less. Perrault took a hand. Between them, they ran him about for the better part of an hour. They threw clubs at him, he dodged. They cursed him and his fathers and mothers before him, and all his seed to come after him down to the remotest generation, and every hair on his body and drop of blood in his veins. And he answered their curses with a snarl and kept out of their reach. He did not try to run away, but retreated around and around the camp, advertising plainly that when his desires was met, he would come and be good. So again, he's pitching a fit. He's taunting them. He's teasing them. He's like, you're not going to get me till I get that spot. I don't know if any of you have ever felt that strongly that you deserve something that was given to somebody else and just felt like that was the place you're going to take a stand and you weren't going to let anybody take that spot from you. Francois sat down and scratched his head. Perrault looked at his watch and swore. Time was flying, and they should have been on the trail an hour gone. Francois scratched his head again. He shook it and grinned sheepishly at the courier, who shrugged his shoulders in sign that they were beaten. Then Francois went to where Sol-leks stood and called to Buck. Buck laughed, as dogs laugh, and kept his distance. Francois unfastened Sol-leks' traces and put him back in his old place. The team stood harnessed to the sled in an unbroken line, ready for the trail. There was no place for Buck save at the front. Once more, Francois called, and once more, Buck laughed and kept away. So he got his way, but he's still like, yeah, I'm not sure. Trow down to the club, Perrault commanded. Francois complied, whereupon Buck trotted in laughing triumphantly and swung around into position at the head of the team. His traces were fastened, the sled broken out, and with both men running, they dashed out to the river trail. Highly as the dog driver had forevalued Buck with his two devils, he found, while the day was yet young, that he had undervalued. At a bound, Buck took up the duties of leadership, and where judgment was required and quick thinking and quick acting, he showed himself the superior even of Spitz, of whom Francois had never seen an equal. So what they're saying is they knew he was a valuable dog when they picked him up. But as high as they thought he was valued, he was worth way more. And the reason he was worth way more is that he's not just strong and diligent, but he's crafty and smart and cunning, and he can think on his feet. So if something needs to be decided at the moment, he can see and almost think ahead of the person driving the sled dog team. But it was in giving the law and making his mates live up to it that Buck excelled. Dave and Sol-leks did not mind the change in leadership. It was none of their business. Their business was to toil and toil mightily in the traces. So long as that were not interfered with, they did not care what happened. Billy, the good-natured, could lead for all they cared, so long as he kept order. The rest of the team, however, had grown unruly during the last days of Spitz, and their surprise was great now that Buck proceeded to lick them into shape. So here the dogs are having like a bit of a shock because this whole time Buck has been pushing them to taunt with Spitz and making them break the rules and steal things. And now out of nowhere, the leader of like these fun, good times and rowdy happenings is suddenly the leader who's going to put them in line. So he's, in addition to being strong and smart and quick on his feet, he can also put the other dogs in their place and make them stop slacking off or loafing. Pike, who pulled at Buck's heels and who never put an ounce more of his weight against a breastband than he was compelled to do, was swiftly and repeatedly shaken for loafing, and ere the first day was done, he was pulling more than ever before in his life. So here's Pike, somebody who never puts his best foot forward. He never will pull more than an ounce more than he's supposed to. And this time, Buck kind of inspires him to work harder, so he actually becomes like a better sled dog. And then the first night in camp, Joe, the sour one, was punished roundly, a thing Spitz had never succeeded in doing. Buck simply smothered him by virtue of superior weight and cut him up till he ceased snapping and began to whine for mercy. The general tone of the team picked up immediately. It recovered its old-time solidarity, and once more the dogs leaped as one dog in the traces. At the Rink Rapids, 2 native huskies, Teak and Kuna, were added, and the celebrity of which Buck broke them in took away Francois's breath. Just like horses, anytime like Buck had to get broken into the job because he had never done it before, Buck is going to break these dogs in the same way he was broken in. Never such a dog as that Buck, he cried. Never. Heem worth $1,000 by gar. Eh? What you say, Perrault? And Perrault nodded. He was ahead of the record then and gaining day by day. The trail was in excellent condition, well packed and hard, and there was no new fallen snow with which to contend. It was not too cold. The temperature dropped to 50 below zero and remained there the whole trip. The men rode and ran by turn, and the dogs were kept on the jump, with but infrequent stoppages. So now that the team is running smoothly, they're making really good time. They're moving. I can't get over this 50 below zero being a good temperature. I know they want it cold enough that they can ride over the ice, but it's amazing to me that human beings can endure day after day outside in extreme temperatures like that. The 30-mile river was comparatively coated with ice, and they covered it in one day going out, what had taken them 10 days in. And in one run, they made a 60-mile dash from the foot of Lake Lebarge to the White Horse Rapids across Marsh, Tagish, and Bennett, 70 miles of lakes. They flew so fast that the man whose turn it was to run towed behind the sled at the end of the rope. So fast that the man whose turn it was to run towed behind the sled at the end of a rope. And on the one last night of the second week, they topped White Pass and dropped down the sea slope with the lights of Skagway and the shipping at their feet. It was a record run. Each day for 14 days, they had averaged 40 miles. For 3 days, Perrault and Francois threw chest up and down the main street of Skagway and were deluged with invitations to drink. Well, the team was a constant center of a worshipful crowd of dog busters and mushers. Then 3 or 4 Western bad men, inspired to clean out the town, were riddled like pepper boxes for their pains, and public interest turned to other idols. Next came official orders. Francois called Buck to him, threw his arms around him, and wept over him. And that was the last of Francois and Perrault. Like other men, they passed out of Buck's life for good. And I'm going to scroll back up to this other note. There's a lot of information here, and what they're talking about is like the chaos and Wild West nature of the town and all the changes that are happening. And suddenly we just see that Francois gets this letter and suddenly calls Buck over to him. And if you see the note up here, it says the 2 men got new orders, probably to have another job that didn't require dogs or a team. And so one of the things they're going to have to do now is sell Buck to a new owner. And we're going to see that there's a series of different adventures that Buck goes on because of this transfership of ownership. And that was the last of Francois and Perrault. And like other men, they passed out of Buck's life for good. This, like other men, they passed out of Buck's life for good, is foreshadowing that this is not the first time that this is going to happen. So I hope you enjoyed the reading for today. This whole section is primarily about Buck gaining leadership over the dog team, learning how to run. And now this is obviously going to be a very valuable quality and make Buck highly sellable. But you have to remember, with dogs, it's always a much more personal relationship. So Francois and Perrault do not want to leave Buck. He's like this most special dog they've ever come into contact with, but because of the jobs and survival of their own, they have to let him go. So that's enough for today, and then we'll be reading the rest of the chapter in this lesson. And I hope you guys have a great day and get outside, because it's getting nicer out every day. Okay. See you later. Bye-bye.